Find a hotel. Mom and Dad shouldn't be here. That message appeared right as I was pushing my wife's wheelchair up to the gate of the house I had paid for. Atlanta heat pressed down like a furnace. Sweat ran down my back. And Martha, she was shaking from the pain. The gate didn't open. The curtains on the balcony were pulled shut. For the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to have my own child close the door right in my face. If you're listening to this story and it's touching something inside you, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I read every single one. And now, let me tell you what happened right after that moment, when the door never opened. I stood there a few more seconds, as if that iron gate might change its mind if I waited long enough. My hand stayed on the handle of the wheelchair. Martha sat still, her back straight, her face drained of color. She didn't ask anything. Maybe she had already read the message on my phone before I could lock the screen. The house in front of me wasn't unfamiliar. I remembered every brick in the walkway. I remembered the young maple tree I planted the day Caleb signed the house papers. Back then, he said, this would be a home for the whole family. I believed him. I believed enough to sign the last check of my life. I sent back a very short message. Dad just wants to bring Mom inside to rest for a bit. No reply, only silence. I looked up. The second floor was still lit. Low music hummed through thick glass. Luxury cars lined the street. Caleb's partners, I assumed. The people he always called important. More important than the woman who had walked out of surgery less than 12 hours ago. Then I saw Tiffany. She stood behind the balcony glass, holding a clear glass of water. Our eyes met, just for a moment. There was no surprise, no discomfort, only a cold look. Enough for me to understand. That gate was not going to open. Then she pulled the curtain shut, a clean motion, like closing a chapter that had already been read. I bent down and adjusted the thin blanket over Martha's legs. The heat was so heavy, even the plastic handles of the wheelchair felt warm. Sweat soaked the back of my neck. Martha took a very shallow breath, trying not to groan. I had promised the doctor I would take her home so she could rest in familiar space. I never imagined that home would come with conditions. I pushed the wheelchair back a few steps, not because I wanted to leave, but because standing there longer wouldn't change anything. The gate stayed closed. My phone didn't vibrate. There are moments in life when anger doesn't come first. Emptiness does. On the way out, I walked slowly, not because I was tired, but because my mind was trying to rearrange what had just happened. I asked myself if I had missed any signs, if I had failed somewhere as a father, or if I had simply been wrong to believe that blood always comes with responsibility. Martha placed her hand on my wrist. "It's okay," she said softly. I nodded, even though I knew she was comforting me more than herself. We didn't talk in the car. The air conditioning ran at full power, but it couldn't push away the heat outside. I drove south of the city to where I remembered an old roadside motel. I used to take construction workers there, back when I ran job sites. Not fancy, but clean. When I stopped at the desk, that's when I noticed my phone showing payment declined. I tried again. Still nothing. I checked the account. Spending access restricted. I didn't need to call anyone to know who had done that. Caleb once said he would help manage my finances. I agreed. Because I thought I was old. Because I thought trusting my son was natural. I never imagined that convenience would leave me standing at a front desk awkward, like a man asking for charity. The clerk looked at me, then at Martha. She didn't say much, only told me I could pay in cash. I counted every bill in my wallet. Not enough for many nights, but enough for tonight. The room was small. Soft, yellow light. I pushed the wheelchair in and locked the door behind us. When everything finally went quiet, Martha let out a long breath. I helped her onto the bed, careful, like lifting something fragile. "I'm sorry," she said. I looked at her. "You did nothing wrong." Only after saying it did I realize I was saying it to myself, too. I sat down on the wooden chair by the window. Outside, cars passed steadily. The city kept moving, as if nothing had happened. I opened my phone and looked at an old photo of our house back home. The place I had lived for more than 30 years. A new message appeared in my spam folder. An email notification about a property listing. Sender name, Caleb. I didn't open it right away. I placed the phone face down on the table. At that moment, there was no thought of revenge. No grand plan. only one question repeating slowly, heavily, in my mind. When a child closes the door in front of his own parents, what is the very first thing that truly breaks? I did not open that email that night. I knew if I did, I wouldn't sleep, and Martha needed quiet. I turned off the light and lay down on the narrow couch by the window. The old air conditioner hummed steadily, like a tired clock. I stared at the stained ceiling and let the memories drift in on their own. The day Caleb received his college acceptance letter, he ran into the workshop while I was working the night shift. My shirt still smelled of machine oil. He held the letter up his hands, shaking. I didn't read it right away. I just looked at my son's face and understood that from that moment on his life would turn in a different direction. And mine would require more work. I started taking extra shifts. 3 shifts a day were not unusual. Morning at the factory, afternoon fixing machines for a small shop, night deliveries behind the wheel. Some days I didn't come home before sunrise. Martha got used to reheating dinner 3 times. She never complained. She only asked if I was tired. I sold my father's watch in Caleb's 2nd year of college. It wasn't the most valuable thing I owned, but it was the only thing my father left me. I remember placing it on the pawn shop counter. The hands kept ticking. I stood still. I told myself that objects were just objects. Children were what mattered. Caleb graduated. He got a good job, wore suits, drove a nice car. He talked about image, about connections, about how you had to separate to succeed. I nodded, even when I didn't fully understand. When he said he wanted to buy a villa in Atlanta to make business easier, I didn't ask many questions. I asked just one. Is it enough? He said he was short. I transferred the money. That night in the motel room, I opened the email. Line by line, cold and deliberate. A notification listing my old house for sale. The house where Martha planted flowers by the porch. The place I thought we would return to when we got old. The reason was written simply asset restructuring for investment. I finished reading, and my heart didn't beat any faster. There was only emptiness, as if someone had cleared out a room before I had a chance to say goodbye. Martha woke up while I was sitting on the edge of the bed. She looked at me, then at the phone in my hand. I didn't hide it. I handed it to her. She read very slowly. At the last line, she paused longer. He must have his reasons, she said. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I was no longer sure that reasons still existed between us and our son. The next morning, I took Martha in for her follow-up. The doctor said the surgery was progressing well, but she needed rest in a stable environment. I nodded. I didn't say that the stable environment had been locked behind a gate. On the way back, I received a call from the bank. They confirmed the account restrictions per the request of the authorized person. I thanked them. My voice was calm, so calm it surprised even me. Some people shout when they're pushed into a corner. I don't. I spent my life as an engineer. I'm used to observing, measuring, waiting for the right moment. I began to look at everything, not through emotion but through structure. That afternoon, while Martha slept, I took out an old notebook. I wrote down everything that had happened. Dates, times, messages, emails. Not to accuse, but to understand the full picture. When everything was on paper, one thing became very clear. I had handed over control of my life to someone else for far too long. I called an old friend. We worked on a project together more than 20 years ago. Now he's a lawyer. I didn't vent. I only asked what options I still had. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You do, but you have to be ready to accept that things won't go back to the way they were." That evening I sat beside Martha's bed. She was more alert, but her eyes no longer looked at ease. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Find the boundaries again," I said. I didn't sleep much after that. Not from worry, but because my mind was working again, the way it did when I was younger. I didn't look for confrontation. I didn't call Caleb to demand answers. I understood that conversation only matters when both sides still stand on the same ground of respect. And that ground was pulled away the moment the door slammed shut in our faces. One morning I received a message from Caleb. Short, "Are Mom and Dad okay?" I stared at that line for a long time. I didn't reply right away. I thought about Martha, about the wheelchair at the gate, about the curtain being pulled closed. Then I typed one sentence. "Dad wants to talk. Properly." The moment I sent it, I knew I had stepped into a different phase. No longer a father who only sacrifices in silence, but a man who understands that if you don't stand up to protect your own value, silence will keep being mistaken for permission. And this time, I had no intention of standing outside the gate again. Caleb's message was answered almost a full day later. He said he was busy, but could arrange a meeting to clear things up. The way he phrased it told me this wasn't a conversation between father and son. It sounded like a business appointment. I agreed. Not out of hope, but because I needed to see everything one more time in full light. I didn't go right away. I spent the next few days doing small but necessary things. I changed the contact number with the bank. I took back access to the accounts in my name. No noise, no accusations, just putting things back where they belonged. When you've designed complex mechanical systems, you learn that failure often begins with one bolt placed in the wrong spot. While Martha rested, I called my lawyer friend again. We met at a quiet coffee shop. I brought a stack of papers, messages, emails, transfer records, the house purchase documents. I didn't need him to tell me whether Caleb was right or wrong. I only needed to know what I still had the right to decide and what I had unknowingly handed away. He reviewed everything carefully. Then he said one sentence that left me silent for a long time. You're still the one who paid for that house, and you have the right to choose the beneficiary, or choose no one at all. I nodded. That sentence didn't bring relief. It only confirmed something I had already felt. I had confused trust with letting go completely. That evening, I opened the old notebook again. I didn't write about pain this time. I started writing options. If I stayed silent, what would happen? If I faced it, what would change? I wasn't looking to reclaim what I'd lost. I was looking to end a pattern. The idea came slowly, not like a flash of light, but like lines gradually forming on a blueprint. If that house was no longer a home, then it should no longer be used as a tool for anyone to hide their indifference. I asked the lawyer about support funds for seniors. He introduced me to a local organization, transparent, focused on helping elderly people abandoned by family after illness. I read their files through a long afternoon. The stories weren't much different from mine. Only difference was, many of them never got the chance to stand back up. I signed the transfer papers with a very clear state of mind. Not revenge, not punishment, just an ending. When I put the pen down, my hand didn't shake. I knew I was doing what needed to be done. Nothing more. A few days later, I replied to Caleb. I said I wanted to meet at the villa. I said I had reconsidered and wanted to talk things through peacefully. I didn't say anything else. I left space for him to fill with his own assumptions. The response came faster than I expected. Caleb agreed immediately. He suggested combining it with a small gathering, inviting a few close partners. While we're at it, he said, so Mom and Dad can see how stable things are now. I read that line twice. Then I typed back, all right. Martha looked at me when I told her. She didn't ask much, just held my hand. Are you sure? She asked. I'm sure, I said. From that moment until the meeting, I didn't contact Caleb again. I focused on caring for Martha. She was able to take a few steps with a walker now. Each time she did, I became more certain why I couldn't stop halfway. Not because a door had been closed, but because if I turned away, I would be teaching my child that everything can simply be ignored. On the day of the gathering, Atlanta was still hot. I wore my old suit carefully pressed. Martha sat in her wheelchair back straight. We arrived a little earlier than scheduled. I wanted to see the house in silence before it filled again with voices and laughter. Inside, everything was arranged like a stage. Lights, tables, wine. Caleb moved back and forth, shaking hands, smiling. When he saw us, he paused for a brief moment, then quickly put on his familiar confidence. Tiffany stood beside him, nodded politely. I'm glad you came, Caleb said. I nodded. So am I. We took the seats prepared for us. I didn't watch Caleb's partners. I watched my son, the way he spoke, the way he avoided looking at Martha for too long. I realized he had grown used to telling the story in a way that favored him. And tonight he believed I was there to listen to that story. When the gathering reached its peak, Caleb took the microphone. He spoke about success, vision, family as a foundation. I listened carefully, not because the words were good, but because I was waiting for the moment they ended. When he invited me up to say a few words, the room went quiet. I pushed Martha's wheelchair forward. I didn't look at the lights. I looked at my son. I just want everyone to see one thing, I said, my voice steady, not raised. Before we talk about success. I gave a signal. The screen behind us lit up. and in that moment I knew I had reached a point of no return. But this time, I wasn't standing outside the gate. I was in the middle of the room, with the truth placed exactly where it belonged. The screen lit up slowly. No opening sound, just raw footage, slightly shaky. I recognized the angle immediately, because I was the one who set that phone down on the stone base by the gate. That day, the sun was brutal. White light reflected off the pavement, making everything look harsher than usual. In the video, I was pushing the wheelchair. Martha sat still, both hands on her lap. Her face looked tired, but she was trying to stay composed. The timestamp showed in the corner of the screen. Then the message appeared. No need to zoom in. The words were clear enough. Find a hotel. Don't ruin my space. A subtle wave moved through the room. Not loud whispers. Just deeper breaths. Eyes shifting. A chair scraping softly somewhere behind me. Caleb stood beside me, microphone still in his hand. He didn't say a word. Tiffany looked up at the screen, then turned away quickly, as if the light itself hurt her eyes. The video continued. Me replying. No response. The gate still closed. Then Tiffany appeared on the balcony, standing behind the glass. That part lasted only a few seconds, but I knew it was enough. I signaled to stop the video before it ended. I didn't want to drag it out. I didn't need sympathy. I only needed the truth to be seen where it belonged. I'm not showing this to blame anyone, I said, my voice steady. I just want people to understand something. There are doors that close, and they don't close because of the wind. No one applauded. No one overreacted. The silence that followed was heavier than any comment. I turned to Caleb. For the first time that night, he had lost control of his expression. Not anger, not obvious shame, just raw confusion, like when a carefully told story gets interrupted halfway through. My lawyer stepped forward. He didn't look at Caleb. He looked at the room, at everyone present. His voice was clear without personal emotion. This villa, he said, has been legally transferred to a fund that supports elderly people abandoned by their families. Effective as of this morning. Someone let out a quiet gasp. I heard a glass being set down. Caleb snapped his head toward me. Tiffany grabbed his hand, but her grip wasn't strong enough to hold his composure in place. That means, the lawyer continued, those currently residing here no longer have usage rights to this property after 12 hours, unless a new agreement is reached with the fund. Caleb opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at me as if waiting for me to say this was all a misunderstanding. I said nothing. I had already said enough. Caleb's partners began to stand. No accusations, no questions. They shook hands politely, offered brief courtesy remarks, and left. I saw something clearly then. In their world, image matters more than explanations. And the image they had just seen spoke for itself. When the room thinned out, Caleb finally stepped in front of me. What you did was too much, he said, his voice low but tight. I looked at my son. I only put things back under their proper names, I said. Martha gently squeezed my hand. I bent down and adjusted the shawl on her shoulders. I didn't want this conversation to continue. I didn't want it to turn into a confrontation. What needed to be revealed had already been revealed. We left before the night was over. At the gate, I paused for a moment. It was the same gate. The only difference was, this time, I wasn't standing outside. In the car, Martha rested her head against the seat. Her eyes closed. Her breathing was steady. I drove slowly. Not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel each minute passing. I knew that starting tomorrow, things would change. Not loudly, but decisively. Caleb's message came in while we were on the highway. I didn't open it. I placed the phone face down. Some answers don't need to be sent right away. Some relationships need distance to reveal their true shape. That night, I didn't sleep right away. I sat by the window, watching the city fade behind us. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel fully relieved either. I only felt a new kind of quiet, like a machine that had been running off beat for years, finally being shut down. I knew that from tomorrow on, I would have to learn how to live without placing hope in someone else's change of heart. But at least, I had not allowed my silence to keep being mistaken for weakness. And for me, that was enough for one decisive night. The next morning, the city woke up like any other day. There was no sign that the night before had closed a long chapter of my life. I made coffee, opened the window, let the early breeze fill the room. Martha was still asleep. Her breathing was steadier than it had been in days. I stood there for a long time, just watching, making sure I had done what needed to be done. The weeks that followed moved slowly. I didn't follow any news about Caleb. I didn't ask the lawyer what happened after the gathering. I knew things would run their course. When a system is built on the wrong foundation, sooner or later it has to stop, to be rebuilt, or to collapse. One afternoon, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Caleb. His voice was different. No longer quick, no longer confident. He talked about stalled work, about debts that needed handling. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When he asked if I could help, I answered slowly. "Dad won't help with money," I said. "I only hope you learn how to stand on your own without pushing others out of the way." There was silence on the other end. I don't know how much he understood, but I know I said exactly enough. No more, no less. A few days later, Tiffany left. I heard it from an old acquaintance. I wasn't surprised. Some relationships exist only when things are easy. When the ground gives way, they dissolve on their own. Caleb began taking on work he never would have considered before. No one mentioned the past. No one mentioned the villa. Life taught him its lessons in its own way. I didn't stand aside to judge. I didn't step in to fix things for him. I believe everyone has to walk their own road. As for Martha and me, we moved to a coastal retirement community. Not too far, but far enough to begin again in a different space. Things were quiet there. Soft sunlight in the mornings, salty sea air in the afternoons. Martha grew steadier on her feet. I saw her smile more often, not out of effort, but because her heart was lighter. We used what money remained to contribute to the fund that received the house. Not for recognition, only because I knew there were other elderly people standing in front of closed doors just like we once were. If my choice gave them a little more support, that was enough. One afternoon I sat on a wooden bench, facing the sea. The waves weren't large, but they were steady. I thought about the old house back home, about the workshop, about years of non-stop work. I had no regrets. Only one quiet realization, that I had confused sacrifice with losing boundaries for far too long. My phone vibrated, a missed call from Caleb. I looked at the screen, then placed the phone back on the table, not because I didn't want to listen, but because I knew some conversations need the right moment, and that moment cannot be forced by guilt or fear. Martha came out and sat beside me. She leaned gently against my shoulder. We didn't speak. In front of us was the sea. Behind us everything we had lived through. And I understood something clearly then. Peace doesn't come from getting back what was taken. It comes from realizing you no longer need it. I thought about a line that had stayed with me for a long time. A home isn't built from bricks and stone. It's built from presence, from responsibility, from not turning away when someone needs you most. When a person trades those things for image or advantage, they don't just close the door on others. They tear down their own roof. The sun sank lower. Light reflected off the water, slowly softening. I took a deep breath. For the first time in many years, I wasn't waiting for anything. I had lived long enough to understand that fairness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's simply standing in the right place at the right time, and refusing to be pushed outside ever again. I stood up and pushed Martha's wheelchair back. Behind us, the sea remained. Ahead, the road wasn't long, but it was calm enough to keep moving forward. And for me, that was a good ending. If you've listened to this story all the way through, thank you for staying. If it made you think about family, about boundaries, about respect, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear a story like this. Every follow helps me keep telling stories that are slow, honest, and meaningful. Thank you for listening, and may you always find peace in the place you call